How many people, this is crowd participation, how many people in the room have a loved one, a friend, a relative, a family member, somebody that you love dearly, you think that they are the best thing since sliced bread, but they have some miles between you. They live in another state, they live on the other side of the country, they live in a different country. Anybody know what I'm talking about? You got a loved one, they're far away, and there's this separation there, right? My son just is in the middle of his first year at Western Colorado State University. And so he is in Colorado. And I know you're automatically going, why in the world would you let your 18-year-old son move to Colorado? I don't know. It was a moment of weakness. We were kind of tired. He was like, I want to go to Colorado. And at the time, we were like, it sounds great, go. And a lot of people at the church have been coming up to me and going, hey man, what's it like? Are you and mom doing okay? I know that you don't get to see Bryce. Bryson's my only son. I have a daughter, 22. Her name's Brianna. She was on the big screens just a second ago. But she's finishing up her last year at Stan State. She lives at home. So I get to see her all the time. So it's different for mom and I to not have Bryson there. And people have been coming up and saying, are you guys doing okay? How are you doing? I know it's hard when one of them leaves the nest and all that. And to be honest, yes, it is hard. But the truth of the matter is that I actually talk to Bryson now more than I did when he lived at home. He is a homebody, and he loves his family. That's one of the ways that he gets and receives love, is to be around us. He's a huge mama's boy. And so Bryson will call or text, or he likes to FaceTime us. So I think it gets a little bit more personal when he FaceTime. You can see what's going on. And he calls us 2 or 3 times a day. And we're not complaining, because I know that's not the case with most, parents and students and all that. So we're definitely not complaining. But like when he calls, he doesn't want to really talk about anything in particular. He just wants to talk. And it's awesome. So I actually do talk to him now more than I did when he lived at home. It was college football Saturday. Football is a big thing in my house. And I'm kind of a guy, I love to be by myself. And so there was one Saturday, Brianna was gone. Tracy had something to do at the pregnancy center, so she was gone. And I had the house to myself. And I was like, sweet, game's coming on. Like, I didn't even care who was playing. I had my little plate of snacks. I had the remote. I was in my baggy, comfy sweats. I had the house to myself. As the game kicks off, my phone rings, and it's Bryson wanting to FaceTime me, right? And I was like, okay, all right, cool. So I accepted the FaceTime. He's like, what are you doing? I go, watching the game. He goes, sweet, I don't have cable up here. Let me watch the game with you. And so I just turned the phone around, set up the phone to where the TV was, and for 2.5 hours, we just sat there and watched the game. It was awesome. Yeah. It was awesome. When he moved to Colorado, I had to up my data to unlimited because it was just calling all the time. And so when you have someone, a relationship, the thing you want the most is to be in their presence. And text messages, phone calls, Facebook is awesome, but nothing is like the real thing, like being with them. Bryson gets to come home in a couple of weeks for the Christmas break, and I can't wait until that kid is there. I want to grab him and hug him. I just want to be in his presence, I just want to scob his knob and just hug him close, Because nothing is like the real thing. One of the promises and the gifts that God has given us as Christians, as followers of Him, is the fact that His presence will always be with us. The Bible says He'll never leave us, He'll never forsake us, He'll never turn His back. Jesus, one of His last words was, He says, I'll be with you always to the very ends of the age. Go into the world, preach the gospel, but just know I'm going to be with you. I'm going to be here. The Bible has made it clear that God has given us the gift of the Holy Spirit to live inside of us and to counsel and guide us. And that presence never leaves. It's always there. One of my favorite scriptures is that there's nothing that we can do to make God turn His back. There's nothing that will separate us from His love. He is always there through thick and through thin. God's presence is an awesome thing, and there's nothing quite like it. But the problem is that there's a lot of things about God's presence that we don't understand. It's hard for us to wrap our heads around it. And so it's very easy to fall into a trap where we equate God's presence with a feeling that we have. I can feel God. I know his presence is here because I can feel it. When I read the Bible, the scriptures jump off the page, and in my subconscious, I can hear God speaking to me. I know he's there. It's a feeling that I have when I'm in a great worship set with 700 other people, and hands are in the air, and eyes are closed, and the band is kicking, and I can feel God because the hair on the back of my neck stands up, and I get a chill down my spine, and I just know that I know that that's God. That's his presence, right? Oh, I thought it was my phone. Could have been the president. You never know. And I could just feel God, right? But I think that we get into this trap when we set ourselves up for failure, when we believe or when we equate God's presence with a feeling. And the reason for that is this: feelings lie to you. One day I can feel this way, and 5 hours later, I might feel something totally different. And when we equate God's presence with a feeling, we really do ourselves a harm, because I don't know if you've lived life for Christ for any certain period of time, but I can tell you this out of experience and out of knowing and living it since I was 17 years old, that feeling is going to go away. And the problem is, does that mean that God's presence has gone away? Today, we are going to be talking about God's presence. And I've entitled the message "More Than a Feeling," because I had great intentions for this message. I was going to pull you in today. I was going to give you a shot in the arm. Weekend after Thanksgiving, you're tired, you're weak, you're exhausted from annoying family members and all that stuff. And I was just going to charge you up and say, God's presence is always going to be there. It's the best gift that you have. You can't put a price on it, and it's going to be awesome. God, it's more than a feeling. It's just, but he's there. You've got this. And I was going to just preach this easy little message. It would have made you happy, would have made me happy, everybody would have been great. But over the course of studying for this message, something changed. And I'll go into that in a little bit. But something changed. And I want to get a little bit more real, and I want to hit you a little bit more deep, a little bit more personal. I want to talk about what happens when we don't feel God. I believe Adam and Eve had this feeling that God had left them. It wasn't true, but they had this feeling that God had left them. See, Adam and Eve were created by God. They were put in this garden. God said, everything is yours. Just don't eat from the middle of the tree, right? The one tree, don't eat that fruit. But everything else is yours. I've created it all. Have at it. This is your paradise. Just please don't do this one thing. As you know, Adam and Eve did the one thing. Anytime we disobey God, anytime we come outside of God's umbrella, anytime we do things our way rather than God's way, there is always, always, always consequences. So God came down. Bible says immediately after they committed the sin that they felt naked, they felt shame, right? God came down and started to hand out consequences. To the woman, he said childbearing is going to be more painful than ever. It's going to be difficult. He also handed out a few other punishments to the woman. To the man, he looked at him and he said, your punishment is going to be, you're going to have to work for a living. You're going to have to toil and sweat, and the ground is going to be cursed. And you're just going to, every single day, you're just going to have to just put in the time to your dying day. You're just going to have to work hard. And then he took it one step further. He kicked them out of the garden. Said, you can't have any of this anymore. And they left the garden and they had to fend for themselves. And then God took it even one step further, and he put an angel and a flaming sword back and forth to guard the way back to the tree of life. Said, you're never coming back in here. Adam and Eve must have felt that God's presence had left them. Out of all those consequences, I think that wasn't the most serious thing they lost. The most serious thing they lost was that feeling that God had abandoned them, that feeling that they had lost that presence. Genesis 3:8 says this, right after they had sinned, this is the one that sticks out to me the most. Right after they had sinned, Genesis 3:8 said this, when the cool evening breezes were blowing, the man and his wife heard the Lord God walking about in the garden. So they hid from the Lord among the trees. God created Adam and Eve for relationship. He would come down on a regular, spend time with them, be in their presence, allow them to be in his presence. When they got kicked out of the garden, they didn't get that anymore. And they must have felt as if God had left. Now, don't get me wrong. God never left. He was still there. But it was definitely different than it was in the garden. As Christians, we are guaranteed that we can't go anywhere, can't do anything, can't get high enough on the mountain or low enough in the valley for God to ever turn his back on us. He says that he will always be there for us. It says this in Psalms, I believe it's 139. Yes, Psalms 139, verses 7 through 12. It's in your program. It's also going to be on the screens. This is God's promise about his presence. It says this: I can never escape your spirit. I can never get away from your presence. Even if I go up to heaven, you are there. If I go down to the grave, you are there. If I ride the wings of the morning, if I dwell by the farthest oceans, even there your hand will guide me and your strength will support me. I could ask the darkness to hide me and the light around me to become night, but even in darkness, I cannot hide from you. Amen? Amen. That's God's promise. That nothing we can do will ever separate us from his love. Nothing we can do will ever truly separate us from his spirit. That his spirit is there. That he will constantly guide, constantly lead, constantly protect, constantly have his thumb on your life. That you've got that guarantee. But here's the problem, folks. It's more than a feeling. And when the feelings go away, it doesn't mean that the presence has gone away. He's still there. When I write a message, when I study for it, obviously my face is in the Bible and I find the right passage and then I build the message from there. And one of the tools that I use is YouTube. I love to get on YouTube and listen to men and women of God speaking on something that I feel led to speak on. And it's not so that I can carbon copy or steal their message or their ideas. We don't do that. It's so that when I hear what they're saying, maybe they have a different twist. Maybe they have a different perspective on it. Maybe it's something I never thought of before, and I go, aha. And it helps me to write a better, well-rounded message. So this message was no different. And remember, I said earlier, I was going to write this happy-go-lucky, feel-good message. Everybody was going to be content. You were going to be content. I was going to be content. It was all going to be good. And then I got down a rabbit trail looking at these messages on God's presence. I heard these great speakers talking about how God will never leave. They used passages that gave us promises about his presence always being there. And I started to read the comments that went along with the videos. Real life people like you and me that were looking at these same videos and writing comments. And the comments just stopped me in my tracks. The comments were very real. And they look like this. I want to share a few with you. One of them said, I've never heard God talk to me, never felt his presence, and it makes me feel alone. I certainly don't feel peace or joy. Another one says, so what happens when we don't feel God or Jesus on the inside? Not a feeling of something physical, but an internal feeling. I never feel joy or peace. I don't feel anything. The other one said, I've not felt God for such a long time. He seems to have forgotten me. The reason this stopped me in my tracks is because it reminded me of a time in my life that for 10 years, I kind of walked in the wilderness, kind of feeling separated from God. If you know anything about my story, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, I went into ministry right out of high school, felt a calling on my life, thought I was supposed to work with young people. I was convinced. I went to work for one church, worked there for a few years, got asked to leave because I wasn't doing it right in their opinion. So I had to leave. And then I went to another church and I worked there 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then I got asked to leave. And when I got asked to leave the second time, I was done with ministry. I said, I'm never going back. And I said, this is stupid, you know. I just went to work. I picked up a welding torch and I went to work being a welder. And for 10 years, I walked around in this dark place where I didn't feel anything. And I felt as if God had turned his back on me, that God had abandoned me. For 5 of those 10 years, things were really, really dark. I didn't feel God's presence. I thought that he had left. I thought I had done something wrong to cause him to turn and run away from me. After 5 years of total and complete darkness, swearing off ministry and saying, I'll never be back. I'll never preach another message. I'll never be back in full-time ministry again. After 5 years, I said, something's got to change because I can't live like this. See, in the matter of those 5 years, I had forgotten a lot of things. I had forgotten that I was called to ministry. I had forgotten that nothing I could do would ever separate me from God. I'd forgotten that he has a plan and a purpose and a will for my life. I'd forgotten all those promises that at one time I was preaching to other people. Now, during this time, I never totally separated from God. I'd come to church every Sunday. In fact, that's how I found New Life. I came to New Life after the second time I was fired, and I sat in the back row, and for 3 years I sat in the back row and I told nobody anything about my life. Pastor Dave, Gina, any of the other pastors here, nobody knew I was a pastor. I was just an attender at New Life. But I came every Sunday, even though I didn't feel God's presence. And then after about 5 years, God started to do something in my life. So when I read these comments, it hit home because I know what it feels like to feel as if God's presence has left. And I'm here today to remind you that his presence is more than a feeling. You can't judge God's presence in your life based on how you feel today, based on one good message, based on, a great worship service where you felt God. Because the problem is that you're sitting here worshiping God and you feel absolutely nothing, and the other 800 people around you have their hands in the air and the eyes closed, and you're going, God, what's wrong with me? What did I do? What did I do to make you turn your back on me? What did I do to cause you to leave? What did I do? God's presence is more than a feeling. And over the next 15 minutes, I want to give you some tools that I use, some tools that are scriptural, to help you to realize and recognize what the real presence in your life is about. And to help you, if you happen to be where I was, to maybe come out the other side stronger. I want to say this before we jump into the tools. First and foremost, this is normal. You cannot follow God for an extended period of time without going through valleys where you feel separated from him. There is nothing wrong with you. You have not done anything that caused God to turn his back. Sure, you have sin in your life. I have sin in my life. When we verbally or when we physically sin, when we willfully sin against God, it does bring separation between us, but never enough for him to turn his back and just wash his hands and say, I'm done. Right? So I want to give you some tools, and I want to say up front that these tools are not rocket science. I'm not going to tell you anything today that you haven't heard before. I just want to remind you, because I know what it's like to be in a place where you feel God has left. And I want to remind you of some simple things that help me, so hopefully it will help you. See, things just got real, right? Things got real. But sometimes it's good to be real. If you're a note taker and you want to fill in some blanks, pull out your sheet because we're off to the races. What do we do when we don't feel his presence? What do we do when we don't feel his presence? Write this down for number one. Get honest with God. Get honest with God. It is awesome when God gets honest with us. We welcome it. We like it when God goes, hey, see that? That's what we're going to work on. Hey, see this? That needs to be tweaked. We understand and we appreciate it when God gets honest with us. But for some reason or another, we feel as if we can't get honest with him. I went through years and years and years of not being honest with God. And I don't know why. I knew he was God and he was holy and I wanted to be respectful and reverent, but for so many years I just went through and I didn't tell him anything I was feeling inside. I didn't verbalize it because he was God. And I thought, well, he knows. Well, yeah, he does know. But he also is begging for you to tell him. He's begging for you to say it out loud. I believe God uses honesty, the messiness of honesty. I believe God does some of his best work in the messiness of honesty. When we finally get to a point where we have no other choice but to cry out to God and just tell him exactly how we feel. I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm confused, I'm hurt, I'm broken inside, I feel lonely, I feel like you left. What have I done? I don't understand. When you verbalize that to God, God goes, finally. Finally, we can be real. Finally, we can start going to work. I was just waiting on you to say it. I was waiting on you to be honest. There's a great illustration in John chapter 4 of a woman at a well. And Jesus went through a ton of obstacles just to be at that well that day because he needed to have an encounter with this woman. This woman had a hard life. She'd made choices that made her feel isolated and separated. She was an outsider looking in, and she felt stuck. And more importantly, she felt hopeless. And Jesus overcame a ton of obstacles that I don't have time to go into just to get to that well at noon to meet her. He knew she was going to be there at noon. So she comes, she goes to the well, she's drawing a bucket of water. Jesus asked her for something. He asked her for a drink. She kind of got snotty with him and said, why in the world are you asking me for a drink? You're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan. You don't even like me, and I definitely don't like you. And Jesus kind of flipped the script on her, and he said, woman, he said, if you understood who it was that was asking you, if you understood the gift that God has for you, you would ask me for living water, and I'd give it to you, and you never thirst again. She was confused. She didn't quite understand. So we tried to break it down a little bit more, and she still didn't get it. At one point, she really thought he was talking about physical water that you would drink and make you never thirsty again. So she said, yeah, give me some of that water, because then I don't have to come back to this well anymore. And so then Jesus used truth and honesty to break down the walls that were separating them. And he shocked her into reality. And at one point, he looked at her and he said, why don't you go get your husband? And she says, well, I don't have a husband. And this is where the truth came in. Mic drop. Jesus goes, yeah, you're right. You don't have a husband. In fact, you've had 5 husbands, and the guy you're shacking up with right now, you're not even married to him. Her eyes got this big around. He had her attention. The honesty that he used to break down those walls just collapsed her to a lump of clay. But she didn't stay there, because then Jesus started rebuilding and remolding and reshaping. God uses the messiness of honesty to cause true transformation in our life. That young woman that day had the great exchange. She gave Jesus her crud, and he gave her eternal life. Bible said she left the well, left the bucket, left everything that was important to her, ran back home, told everybody, I think I met the Messiah today. And he changed everything about my life. But Jesus used that honesty. One of my favorite speakers of all time is Francis Chan. If you know anything about Francis Chan, he's an awesome, awesome speaker. If you ever want to watch a video of Francis Chan, you better carve out an hour and a half, because that dude can speak. So he goes a long time, right? But Francis is one of my most favorite speakers, and he uses this illustration in one of his messages that he says this. He goes, you would never go to your wife or your husband or your kids and say, honey, can we sit down and talk for a second? I need you to do me a favor. I need you to pray that I would love you more. I need you to pray that I would want to fall more in love with you. I need you to pray that you would help me. You would do me a huge favor if you help me to learn to be in your presence more, to learn to recognize your presence, to just want to be around you. You would never pray that prayer. At least I wouldn't pray that prayer. I wouldn't make it past 15 minutes. If I said, honey, will you pray that I would just love you more? She'd be like, you know what, chomp, get out. Hit the bricks, I don't care. Francis says that's exactly the prayer that God wants us to pray, especially when we feel distance. God, I need you to help me to feel you more. God, I need you to understand that I'm confused and I'm hurt and I'm angry and I'm mad. You know, it's okay to be mad with God and to tell him that. We have got to learn to get real and honest with God, especially in those times where we don't feel like being a Christian anymore. We don't feel like his presence is there. We've got to get real about our sins. We've got to get real about our struggles. We've got to get real about the hiccups and the hang-ups in our life that keep tripping us up. We've got to learn to be able to surrender that stuff. But in order to surrender it, I got to talk about it first. It cracks me up how me especially, I'm talking about me, I'm not talking about you, how I feel like I can hide things from my Savior. I can't. He knows everything. But he's waiting for me to get real and talk about it. When's the last time you got honest with God about the way that you're feeling? Write this down for number 2. What do we do when we don't feel God's presence? We need to remember the mountaintop. Remember the mountaintop. The mountaintop is an analogy that Christians like to use to describe a time in their life where they felt the most close to God. In the Bible, throughout the Old Testament, great things happened on the mountaintop. In our present day and age, we like to talk about the mountaintop experience. We went to a women's retreat, and we felt God was there. And I came home different. I went to a men's camp, and I came home different. God was there. The worship was off the chain. Everything was great. My private time with God, I felt like he was sitting right there. Just the scripture was jumping off the page. I just felt God. I take the kids to Hume Lake twice a year, and the high schoolers love to go, but they call it the Hume hangover when they come home, because the mountaintop is not reality. Like, I can take them away to Hume Lake. We can spend 5 days there. They can worship every morning, worship every evening. They have to spend Devo time together with God. The scriptures come alive. God speaks to them. They have an awesome time, but then they come home back to school and family and stress and reality, and they get the Hume hangover because they can't be in God's presence anymore. There's a great saying that says this: don't forget in the dark what you've learned in the light. Don't forget in those dark places what you've learned when you were on the mountaintop. And so the reason I'm telling you to remember the mountaintop is about 5 years into my 10-year hiatus, so to speak, my dark zone, I started to have to remember or remind myself those scriptures that were in that Bible that were promises to me. I had to remember those things. And I had to remind myself of that stuff, the stuff that I had learned while I was in that dark place. Don't forget in the dark what you've learned in the light. I want to read this scripture to you. It's very popular. You might know it. You've probably heard it before. Here it goes. Psalms 23, a psalm from David. The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. He lets me to rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name. Check this out. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. You honor me by anointing my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessing. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever. Surely your blessing and your love, surely your presence, surely your provision, surely your guidance, surely you will follow me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever. That's what I have to remember when I'm in the dark, because that's what I learned when I was on the mountaintop. Don't forsake in the dark what you've learned in the light. Now I have a question for you. Did David write that when he was on the mountaintop? Or did David write it when he was in the valley and he was remembering what he learned on the mountaintop? I don't know. Don't forsake in the dark what you've learned in the light. It changed things for me because I had forgotten a lot of things, a lot of promises. And when I started to reclaim those promises, it changed everything for me. So what do we do when we don't feel his presence? We get honest with God. We remember the mountaintop. And the last thing is this, write this down for number 3. We stay in rhythm. Stay in rhythm. It's easy for us to stay in rhythm when we see or feel results. You know, when we're seeing progress be made, when we're taking steps in the right direction and it's obvious, it's physical, we can see it. It's easy for us to keep doing those things that gave us success, those essentials that we are supposed to do. But when we stop seeing that or we stop feeling that way, it's easy for us to forsake the essentials, right? About 3.5 months ago, maybe 4 months ago, I came to a point in my life where I decided that something has to change. I don't know if you've noticed or not, you probably haven't, but I am a relatively large American. And about 4 months ago, I said, I got to lose some lbs. I've got to put the groceries down and change some things about myself because I just wasn't living life anymore and things had gotten out of control. So I knew it was going to be a long journey, but I was committed to it. And so about 3.5, 4 months ago, I started just kind of doing some things differently. And I started seeing results and things were happening. And when things are happening, it was easy for me every day to get up and go, I got this. I'm in rhythm. I know what to do. Like this is, it's not easy, but it's doable. And I'm seeing my hard work pay off. And then all of a sudden, I hit this slump about 2.5, 3 weeks ago where I didn't lose anything on the scale, but I actually either stayed the same or I started gaining. And that happens sometimes, at least in the course of the first few months. It happened for me, but it would always change within a day or two. And this went like 3 weeks in a row. And I was getting incredibly frustrated to the point that I just kind of wanted to throw in the towel. One day I was having a pity party for myself, and I left the church and I was going to lunch and I was going to go grab a salad like I always did. And all of a sudden, the two Brians that sit on my shoulder, the healthy Brian that needs to change his life and then fat Brian, they started having an argument. As I'm driving, the two of them started arguing. I was like, guys, knock it off. And then the arguing yelling and pushing and shoving. And then lo and behold, fat Brian beat the tar out of skinny Brian. And when after he beat the tar in him, fat Brian is pretty intimidating. After he beat the tar out of skinny Brian, he whispered in my ear and said, let's go get chili cheese dogs. And I'm intimidated of fat Brian, so I was like, okay. And in order to make him like me even more, I said, how about we supersize the fries? And the next thing I know, lo and behold, I'm in the midst of this pity party, and I look up, and Wiener Schnitzel is right there. And so I pull into the drive-thru and I'm like, we're doing this. Because in my opinion, Wiener Schnitzel chili cheese dogs is God's way of saying that he loves you and he wants you to be happy. And so I went and ordered them. And I powered down 2 chili cheese dogs and a large fry. And as soon as I was done, it was like Adam and Eve in the garden. I felt naked and ashamed. I really did. In fact, I had to confess, so I picked up the phone and I called my wife and I was like, honey, I got to tell you something. And don't ever do that to your wife because, after 26 years of marriage, when you call and you got this serious tone and you go, honey, I got to tell you something, she thinks the end of the world, right? She's like, oh, this is it. All of his secrets coming out right now. I go, honey, I just fell off the wagon. I just powered down 2 chili cheese dogs and a large fry. And she goes, well, when you go off the deep end, boy, you just jump in head first, don't you? I said, yes, I do. And she says, was it worth it? And I go, yep. It's totally worth it. When we get stuck, when we don't see results, when we don't feel it anymore, we want to give up the things that had given us success in the past. We want to give up the essentials. I'm begging you to stay in rhythm. I had to get back into rhythm because I fell out of it for so many years. When we talk about the Christian life, what brings us the most success? What keeps us one step closer to becoming more like him? It's all things you've heard before. It's not rocket science. So I don't need to spend a whole lot of time on it. But the 3 essentials that you need is you need God's word. You need God's word. Proverbs 4:20 through 22 says, my child, pay attention to what I say. Don't let your eyes part from my words. Keep them in the midst of your heart, for they bring life to those who find them. The first thing I gave up in that dark zone was I got out of God's word. I didn't want to read it anymore. You know why that's so detrimental? Because this is the primary way that God speaks to you. This is it. He speaks to you other ways, but this is the primary way that God gets his message across to you, that God has a conversation with you. I didn't feel God anymore. I didn't feel like he was there, and so therefore I didn't feel like being in his word. Church, I don't care if it's 2 minutes or 2 hours a day. You have got to stay in rhythm, and you have got to keep your nose in this. Because if you don't have this speaking to you, then the only one speaking to you is the enemy. And he is going to tell you that you've done something wrong, that you've messed with God long enough, that you've done something to offend him. He is going to tell you that you are pointless and useless and you might as well throw in the towel. I was this close to throwing in the towel on Christian life as a whole. I had walked away from ministry. I was dead set. You will never see me in a full-time ministry ever again. I told God that. Don't even think about calling me back to ministry because I ain't going. But I was this close to throwing in the towel on the whole thing. If you don't stay in rhythm and stay in this book brings life. But the problem is this book is just words on a page unless you apply it to your heart. When you apply it to your heart, it becomes a promise that you learned in the light that you can remember when you're in the dark. You've got to stay in God's word. The second thing is pretty simple as well, pretty elementary. You've got to continue to keep praying. Okay, you've got to continue to keep praying. I am blown away at how many young people I talk to on a regular basis that have the courage to tell me, yeah, Brian, I don't pray. Wait, what? Yeah, I don't pray. Okay, I appreciate your honesty, but can I ask you a question? Why don't you pray? I don't know how. Or I think that when I talk to him, I feel silly because nobody's talking back to me. Or I think that he's not there. Sometimes people will get really, really honest with me and they say, well, I prayed for this situation and I prayed for a long, long time and it didn't happen. So I kind of feel like, what's the point? I don't understand how you can stop praying, but yet I remember a time that I stopped praying. When we don't feel close to God, the last thing we want to do is get in a quiet spot and, get rid of all the distractions and just have a conversation with him. But if we don't call upon God, if we don't have that conversation, if we don't let what's bubbling up inside of us out and say to God, I need your help because I'm hurt, I'm confused, and I'm angry, and I'm frustrated, and I don't know where to go from here, and I need your guidance, I need your wisdom, I need endurance, because God, I'm about this close to giving up. If you don't say that to him, you can't get to the point where the healing starts to happen. You've got to stay in your word. You've got to pray. Jesus was fully God and fully human. And he set an example for us over and over in the Gospels. Matthew 14, after he had sent the crowds away, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. Mark 6, after bidding them farewell, he left the mountain to pray. Luke 6, it was at this time that he went off to the mountain to pray. He spent the whole night praying to God. Luke 5:16, Jesus himself would often slip away into the wilderness to pray. Jesus, fully God, but yet fully human, often slipped away in the wilderness to get by himself and pray to his God. When he was in the garden, right before he was arrested, what did he say? God, if there's any way that we don't have to do this, that's what I'm hoping for. But not my will, but your will. That's an honest prayer. We have got to stay in God's word. We have got to stay in God's prayer. And the third thing is this. We have got to stay in community. The last thing you're going to want to do when you feel distance from God is to come and be a part of a community, be a part of a church family, because you have to see people in their faces and they say, God bless you, brother. Hey, how are you? Hey, praise the Lord. How the things? And you're going, I don't feel what you feel. And it reminds us when we see other people worshiping or other people responding to the sermon, just how far away from God we are at that time. And so the hardest part for me in that 10 years was to get up every day and come and sit in the back of the room and see all of you guys in the pocket, in the presence of God. And I felt like I was a million miles away and that God had forgotten my name. It was the hardest thing in the world. Thank God that I came to the right church and listened to the right man, Pastor Dave, for 10 years, speak truth back into my life. Thank God. Because I was this close to throwing in the towel. Don't forsake community. Don't forsake the church. Stay in rhythm. You got to get honest with God. You got to remember what you learned on the mountaintop, and you have to stay in rhythm. I'm going to read this last scripture to you, Hebrews 10. 23 through 25 says, "Let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope that we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promise." God can be trusted to keep his promise. "Let us think of ways to motivate one another with acts of love and good works. Let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near." Don't forsake community. Don't forsake the Bible. Don't forsake your prayer life. Stay in rhythm, even when you don't feel like it. I'm going to close things up. And when I close things up here, I need you to really hear what I have to say. The danger in preaching a message like this is that I run the risk of doing more harm than good. See, I can stand up here on this big, gigantic stage and look at all of you, and I can preach this hard message about truth and hard, difficult things like being separated from God. And basically, essentially what I'm doing is, those of you who know exactly what I'm talking about, I've basically ripped the Band-Aid off. And then in about 2 minutes, I'm going to say, "I hope you have a great week. See ya." And you run the risk of doing more harm than good. That's why it's easier for a preacher to just preach happy-go-lucky messages, because then at least I know I'm trying to do good. But when I read those comments about real people struggling with this idea of God leaving them, I couldn't get away from it. Don't let yourself walk out of here feeling more lonely and more separated than when you came in. Don't let yourself walk out of here with your head hung down. I need you to hear me say that there is nothing wrong with you. You didn't do anything that caused God to turn his back on you. He loves you. He's still there. And his presence is more than a feeling, so stop buying into the lie. You will get through this. I don't know how long it's going to take. There's no recipe, but you will get through it if you don't give up. If you stay honest with God. If you remember the promises that you once held on to so dearly. If you recall those and reapply them to your heart. If you stay in rhythm, read your word, pray, stay in community, you will get through this. There is nothing that you have done or ever will do that made God's presence leave you. He might just be wanting to teach you something. There's something that's going to happen during this dark time that's going to make you stronger. He's preparing you for something else. I don't know. All those answers are true. I don't know which one applies to you. I know for me, he had to teach me some things. My hope and prayer is that you don't walk out discouraged. In just a few minutes when I dismiss, there's going to be a prayer team up here. If you need prayer, come up front, talk to them. They would love to pray with you and support you. I encourage you that if this message was for you today, tell somebody about it. Don't just have a conversation with God about it. That's important. You need to do that. But tell somebody else. Have somebody else hold you accountable. Somebody in your church family. Let the person know that you came with, "Hey, that was for me. He's talking to me. I felt this way for such a long time." Go home and get in your word. Biggest compliment I got this morning was somebody who was here last night that is actually volunteering today. They came to me and they said, I took your advice, and when I got in the car and drove home last night, me and God got real. We got real. Tears running down her face. I said, how'd it go? She goes, it's better. Today is better. That's awesome. Don't let yourself walk out feeling worse than when you came in. This message, as real as it was supposed to be an encouragement that you will get through this. It is more than a feeling. It's real, it's tangible, it's a relationship, and nothing you've done has ever separated you from God's presence. Will you bow your heads with me? Lord, I pray right now for each and every person in this room that might be feeling like you're talking to them. I pray they feel that you're loved this morning. I pray they feel encouraged, Lord. I pray that they don't give up. So, Father, I ask that you would do what you started, that you would continue what you started today. And there's a lot of people in this room right now, Lord, that are saying, okay, I can go one more round. Okay, I can make it one more day. All right, I'm not going to give in the towel or throw in the towel. So, God, I just pray that you would do what only you can do. And you would meet them right where they're at. Lord, I love you. I thank you for the opportunity to preach your word. And I thank you that your presence never leaves. Lord, we ask these things in your name. And everyone said, amen.